Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Defense Secretary Mark Esper arrived in New Delhi on Monday afternoon for the 2+2 dialogue. The talks will be held on Tuesday. The two sides are expected to explore ways to further bolster bilateral defense ties and security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific amidst China flexing its muscles in the strategic region. The visit comes a week before the US presidential election on November 3rd. The Indian side at the talks will be represented by External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. India, the US and several other world powers have been talking about the need to ensure a free, open and thriving Indo-Pacific in the backdrop of China's rising military maneuvering in the region. The holding of the third US-India 2+2 Ministerial Dialogue demonstrates the high-level commitment the two countries provide to shared diplomatic and security objectives, the US State Department had said on Sunday. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze what to expect from the 2+2 dialogue between India and the US. Joining me on the program today are Prabhu Dayal, former ambassador, Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired, Director, India Foundation, and Shubhajit Roy, Associate Editor of the Indian Express. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you first. Let's understand the importance of this particular 2+2 dialogue, considering that the US election is just a week from now.
Well, there are certain questions being asked about the timing, whether it would have been better to have waited for the outcome of the elections and then have had the 2+2. But nonetheless, holding it at this time is also a very significant step. You would recall that the first Indo-US 2+2 dialogue was held in September 2018, the next one in December 2019. So the third one could perhaps have been held in December or January, when the outcome of the elections was known. But the fact is that the timing is perhaps being decided by the threat which is being posed by China and which is going to loom large in the discussions. People refer to China as a dragon, but to me it is a multi-headed snake. And this snake is threatening many countries, including India. As you mentioned, China's expansionism has assumed dangerous proportions, and there is a growing feeling among many countries that it needs to be checked. Therefore, having the 2+2 dialogue at this time and not delaying it is perhaps a wise step. Some topics which will certainly figure in the 2+2 dialogue are the Chinese incursion across the LAC in eastern Ladakh, its aggressive posturing elsewhere, especially in Arunachal Pradesh, its expansionism in the Indo-Pacific region, and its predatory economic activity and the risks posed by China's high-tech telecommunications network. Now, both India and the US feel that it is not only essential to send a strong message to the Chinese, but to also be seen to be taking concrete measures. And therefore, having the 2+2 dialogue at this time is an important step, because the strengthening of defense cooperation will be a very important subject which will be discussed. You would recall that the Indo-US defense ties have been on an upswing in the last few years. In June 2016, India and the US had come close, and the US had designated India a major defense partner and said that it intended to elevate defense trade and technology. Now, the US has 4 foundational agreements. 3 have already been signed by us. And the 4th agreement, which is the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, or BECA, is likely to be signed during this visit of Mike Pompeo and Mark Esper. Now, BECA will provide for sharing of high-end military technology, logistics, and geospatial maps between the two countries. Now, it's equally significant that another important step which could be discussed will be the formalizing of the Quad. Now, it is necessary, from my point of view, to convey that many like-minded countries are standing together, shoulder to shoulder, when it comes to resisting China's expansionism. And it is necessary also for the Quad countries to signal that they are closely cooperating in the defense area. And therefore, the Malabar exercises, which will take place later this year, assume significance. So it will not be lost on the Chinese that Australia will be joining the Malabar exercise this year. So for all these reasons, I think it is good that we are having the 2+2 now, and questions which were being raised about the timing can be set aside in view of the importance of the issues to be discussed.
Absolutely. All right. So since we are here and we are talking about the agenda, Shubhajit, let me bring you to the picture now. So what's on the agenda really as far as Tuesday's 2+2 is concerned?
I think, Frank, I really would take on from where Ambassador Prabhu Dayal actually ended, is this would actually give an opportunity for the two principles from both sides, the four principles, to evaluate and consolidate the gains that have been made in the last 4 years. And that's why this 2+2 ministerial meeting, even towards the fag end of this administration's first term, is very important. And on the agenda would be a complete 360-degree evaluation from defense, security, economic, as well as the strategic relationship where India as a regional and an international leader, how the US administration sees it, that also would be part of the conversation. So right now we have the Esper and Rajnath Singh's meeting happening, and after that, Mr. Jaishankar and Pompeo would also be meeting. And this would give us a sense of the discussions. These bilateral meetings set the stage for Tuesday's 2+2, which will also be followed by a call on the Prime Minister, as well as a meeting with National Security Advisor Ajit Doval.
Okay, all right. I think it's a full plate really as far as the visiting dignitaries are concerned. Lots to be spoken about, lots to do really over the next 24 hours or so. General, let me bring you to the picture now. As far as the defense and strategic aspects of the ties, how have they grown over the last 4 years? General, if you can hear me.
Yes, Frank. Yes, I've got your question now. Frank, I think we are at the cusp of history now, the way I looked at it, because one, as Ambassador Prabhu Dayal very rightly mentioned, we have actually gone on taking on this 2+2 just a few days just a few days ahead of the elections in the United States, which will take place, I think, on 3rd or 4th of November. Now, it is important to the Americans also. That means we are receiving bipartisan support from both the Democrats and the Republicans to have gone. So I think this is the first most important aspect, that it is important to the Americans and it is equally important to India. Now, the centrality of what is happening really is the problems which have been caused by China in the Indo-Pacific region and in certain border areas, especially on our borders with Eastern Ladakh. So, having said that, I think what is going to come out on the open discussions is how to secure a free and open navigation in the Indo-Pacific, and how to, in a broader sense, keep China's aggressive designs under control. So, the ambassador also mentioned about BICA, the Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement. I have a feeling that will be signed, as he has said. We are both on the same lines there, because with the signing of the BICA, the 4 foundational agreements will finally have taken shape. But I think we need to do much more. We need to get onto the Quad, and the Quad cannot be, as has been stated many times, based on an emotional issues. It has to be agenda-based. So, what is that agenda which we need for the Quad? I think that needs to be worked out between both the United States and India. And once that is worked out, we'll have to get Japan and Australia on board. And more importantly, then we have to look to the Quad Plus. The Quad cannot be viewed as a Asian NATO. It has to have a totally different complexity based on what our requirements are. And our requirements are it has been stated by the Prime Minister, a free and open navigation as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned. We need to give security to all the regional countries, and all the democracies there need to, we need to at some point of time get them onto the Quad to make a regional structure by which the self-interest of all people can be preserved. Frank.
Right. Okay, points taken. Now let's take the discussion forward. I think it was focused a lot on China and the Indo-Pacific and China's role in the Indo-Pacific as such, or in the Indian Ocean. So, Ambassador, what are the commonalities really as far as India and the United States are concerned in the Indo-Pacific? Do we have shared goals? Do we have shared interests? And do we share the same views on this particular region?
Well, very frankly, the threat of Chinese expansionism is a shared threat between India and the United States. And as you know, since the 2+2 dialogue is a comprehensive dialogue aimed at strengthening cooperation in security and strategic affairs, therefore, the threat from China in any part of the world, whether it is across the LAC or whether it is in the Indo-Pacific region, becomes important as far as this sort of a 2+2 dialogue is concerned. Now, the US, in particular, the Trump administration, has been taking a very tough line towards China. If you recall, just a few days ago, Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun visited India, and he called China an elephant in the room. Because that is how China is being perceived. China is sometimes described, as I said, as a dragon, but it's a multi-headed snake, and it's threatening a lot of countries. And the Deputy Secretary of State of the United States said that Washington is keen to advance India's interests in the region, build a free and open Indo-Pacific, and counter risks posed by Chinese technology. Now, he was highlighting the shared perceptions between our two countries. But that's not the only time when the US has echoed our fears about China. On October 2nd, a State Department official had said, our position on some parts of the border is explicitly clear. And this official said, for nearly 6 decades, the US has recognized that Arunachal Pradesh is Indian territory. That is something that the Chinese would have hated to hear. But the official also said, at a time when India is facing substantial security challenges, the growth in our defense partnership is exceptionally important. Now, this partnership naturally doesn't relate only to the line of control, but it relates to China's expansionism everywhere. And for this reason, as General mentioned a little while ago, formalizing the Quad, giving it a proper agenda, giving it more structure, more form, more teeth, more strength is very, very important. So in that context also, the 2+2 strategic and security related dialogue will be very, very important. Of course, given the challenge from China, the defense cooperation aspect is very important. But let me also mention that perhaps it will be very important also to discuss certain other issues like Afghanistan. Now, the US rapid withdrawal from Afghanistan is posing certain risks and challenges to us because we have invested quite heavily in the welfare of Afghanistan. And if the US forces withdraw, the Pakistanis will have an easy time infiltrating their forces, infiltrating whatever they can in terms of weaponry, and threatening the government in Kabul. And for sure, the Chinese will abet them in this regard. I think the Americans need to be sensitized about our concerns in this regard, because the American withdrawal without a proper power sharing agreement in Kabul threatens the interest of the government in Kabul. At the same time, it threatens our interest and lays the field open for China's expansionism through Pakistan in Afghanistan also. So when we are talking of checking the Chinese threat and we are taking into account threat perceptions from the Chinese mainland, we have to take into account Afghanistan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the entire South China Sea. And I think it's very significant that Mike Pompeo and Mark Esper will also be visiting Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Indonesia, because in one sense or another, all these are impacted by Chinese expansionism.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. So, Shubhajit, as far as the 2+2 dialogue is concerned, what would India like to take away from it?
Yeah, so the Becca Pact will be a very, very crucial, outcome if it is signed, and even if it is not signed, if they announce conclusion of the agreement, because when U.S. President Trump had visited India in February this year, at that point of time, the two leaders had agreed that they would like to conclude the agreement quite early, and now because highly classified and highly technical and high resolution images, if they can be accessed by India according to this agreement, then this would sort of put much more better surveillance, add to the surveillance capabilities of India, especially along the LSC. So that will be a major takeaway, because we are almost more than 5.5 months of this border standoff, and India needs much more intelligence, much more capability enhancement in that area to prepare for any eventuality, especially during the winters. So that would be definitely a big outcome. Apart from that, there is a talk of increasing the counterterrorism cooperation, where there'll be two more Indian officials who would be designated and placed in counterterrorism agencies in each other. So there is talk of that as well, which will be discussed during the meetings. And apart from all of this, obviously, as we framed this particular discussion earlier, that because the both countries, have shared concern about China, shared values, so they would like to collaborate much more closely in near future. What we have seen is this particular concern has been especially bipartisan in Washington in the last couple of years, and China as a threat is emerged, especially in the face of the pandemic. We have seen it loud and clear. So the two ministers coming to India all the way, flying down, rather than doing it as a virtual meeting, itself is a signal that how important they value, how much value they give to this relationship, and how much more concerned they are when it comes to the Chinese threat and Chinese belligerence. So I think these are some of the headline topics that we would sort of see in the discussions. But also they would also sort of try to insulate this particular conversation from any political change in the administration if it happens in Washington. The purpose of this particular dialogue is to sort of consolidate the gains, so that even if there is a change in administration in Washington, which we'll get to know by early November, then there is no disruption in the cooperation, especially in the strategic sector. So that, I think, is a very, very important signal. And that's why these two ministers, the two top cabinet rank ministers from Washington, coming to India at this kind of a time when almost all major meetings have taken place through virtually. And Quad was an exception, and this is again an exception. So in that sense, it's a very, very important signal.
Absolutely. The signaling is everything really as far as this particular dialogue is concerned. So, General, let me bring you in now. Let me go back to a point that the ambassador was making earlier in the program about Afghanistan. So, do you see Afghanistan featuring in the talks? At what level, and how concerned are both parties about Afghanistan?
I think as far as Afghanistan is concerned, there is a slight difference of opinion between both the United States and India on this particular issue, because the US is very keen to get out, And in India's perception, it is essential that the United States stays put to see that the situation remains stable as of now. If the US withdraws completely, 100% withdrawal from Afghanistan, I'm afraid it is simply a matter of time, maybe a year or 2 years before the Taliban take over, because then they will have the support of Pakistan to do what has to be done. However, if only a partial withdrawal takes place, and there are certain elements of American troops which remain there to provide a certain element, especially intelligence support and to a limited extent material support to the Afghan national forces, in my view, the Afghan national forces can hold on, especially if the funding to Afghanistan is maintained. So this will be a matter of concern to India, but I don't think it'll form a major chunk of what is going to be discussed. Along with Afghanistan, I think Iran is good. The Iran issue is equally important for India, and I think that will be placed by India on the table because our energy supplies come through the Gulf. We need a line to Afghanistan which goes via Iran by the Chabahar port. We are constructing the Chabahar port. And so all those challenges are actually also remain. So I think that is also, when we're looking into the regional countries, I think both Afghanistan and Iran may be under discussion. Iran, I believe, will be more important for India as far as the discussion is concerned. The other aspects which are likely to come in my view, I think India will take up the issue of technology transfers. Now we are talking of upper end technology, which is something very important to India. And how far will the US go in looking into India's requirements? That yet has to be seen. The Americans, rightly so. I mean, every country it keeps its upper end technology very close to its chest. But to what extent can the Americans help out, especially in this particular period? Because the more America helps India, the more America is looking after its own self-interest. The counter to China ultimately is going to come from India.
Right.
Now, having said that, there are two aspects to the India-China dispute, to the India-China relationship, which I would just like to highlight here. When we are looking into our land dispute with China and Chinese aggressive behaviors in eastern Ladakh, and possibly it may come up in Arunachal later, this is something which India will address bilaterally. We will not look into a third country involvement. We will do what has to be done, and we will do it effectively. So I think any aggressive design by China, we will counter militarily, economically, diplomatically, politically, but we will do it ourselves.
Sure.
We will look for support certainly from the Americans in terms of intelligence and in terms of say material support in terms of advanced technology weapons. But it will be limited to that. The more important thing will be to counter China in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in the South China Sea and in the Indian Ocean. Now, that is where the Quad really needs to get into shape. So we've got to see that will Quad simply remain a talking shop, or are we going to make it agenda-based? Once we make it, because today we are in a very good situation, all the four major democracies which are part of the Quad are on board and they're willing to go forward, which was not the case earlier. So today that scenario has changed. And can we get the smaller democracies also, all the regional countries on board to make it a Quad plus, make it agenda-based, and then I think we would have gone a very, very great step forward in this 2+2 arrangement.
Absolutely. All right. Quick closing comments now from all my panelists for the best way forward. I've got 2 minutes left on the program, so kindly be brief, starting first with you, Ambassador.
Well, the best way forward is to be prepared for the worst. The Chinese will continue to give us trouble. And frankly speaking, at the LAC, we have to take them on our own. But if we can get help from other countries, there's nothing wrong with that. I would like to touch very briefly once again on the Afghanistan issue. You see, the Chinese are very keen to fill the space which may be created by the American exit from Afghanistan.
Right.
And in this regard, the Pakistanis, who are their all-weather friends, will give them all possible help. Pakistan and China would both like to see India elbowed out of Afghanistan.
Right.
And to be able to exercise more influence in Kabul. So if we can take up our concerns with the Americans in this regard, I think it will be quite useful from our point of view,
Sure.
because the Chinese are looking to exploit the vast resources of Afghanistan, filling
Right.
up more space, as they want to do elsewhere in the region around them. So, in a nutshell, sensitizing the US about our concerns on this aspect and on several others, including the line of
Points taken.
control in South China Sea, Indian Ocean, etc., would be just right for us.
Absolutely. Shubhajit.
I think the best way forward is that to bulletproof the relationship from any ups and downs, the changes in the administration that may happen, and that I think will be the way forward, because both have a strong and growing bilateral relationship built on shared values and a commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. So right now, as US welcomes India's emergence as a leading regional and global power, so it would be incumbent on both countries to operationalize all the agreements, and also sort of implement all the pacts that have been signed in the last 4 years.
Points taken. All right.
And take everything forward.
All right, General, quick closing comment from you.
Right. I just have two comments. One, on the Indian Ocean region, let India promote regional security alignments along with the Quad. That means the Quad Plus. As far as our borders with China are concerned, I think it is incumbent on us now to increase both our defense capability and our economic capability, because as Mr. Roy has very correctly said, the Chinese threat is not going to go away. It is a long-term threat. We will have to prepare for it on a long-term basis by being economically and militarily strong. Frank.
All right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion, or what's on the agenda as far as 2+2 is concerned, is BECA, that is the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. China, Quad, Malabar exercise, and maybe even Afghanistan. And the purpose of this particular dialogue is to ensure that we evaluate and consolidate on the gains of the last 4 years. China has pushed both nations to hold the 2+2 dialogue at this point in time. China's hegemonistic attitude is a concern for both countries, and both countries will be watchful and will collaborate on this front. Amidst the ongoing pandemic, when almost all meetings and all bilaterals are taking place virtually, the visit of two of the highest ranking officials from the US to India shows the importance of this relationship. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.